Imagine trying to, say, get your Canadian university degree verified in Berlin, or maybe prove a professional certification while you're working over in Ottawa. You want to do it instantly, digitally, no paper, and importantly, without some big tech company mediating it all. That friction you'd feel, that gap between our digital lives and, frankly, kind of outdated border processes.
That friction is exactly what we're digging into today. We're looking at this really intense, high-stakes push for seamless interoperability,
Hmm.
specifically for digital credentials and what are called trust services between the European Union and Canada.
Right.
And it's not just about making things quicker. It's actually about potentially building the global standards for digital trust.
So, our mission here today is to give you a shortcut, a way to understand this, well, pretty critical transatlantic effort. We've gone through a whole stack of materials notes from a major workshop, a brand new study. And the goal is by the end of this deep dive, you'll have the fast track. You'll get the regulatory, the legal, even the political solutions being talked about to make this real.
And the context for all this is really important. It all kind of came together, crystallized at a high-level workshop. It was focused specifically on digital interoperability and mutual recognition. Happened recently, October 6th, 2025, at the Senate of Canada in Ottawa.
Wow. Okay. The Senate. So, a serious venue.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it was co-hosted by the delegation of the European Union to Canada and the Digital Governance Council, or Conseil de Gouvernance Numérique.
And this wasn't just a standalone meeting, right? It fits into a bigger picture.
Exactly. It's described as a central pillar of the long-term EU-Canada digital partnership. And it's a direct follow-up to that historic EU-Canada summit they had in Brussels last June.
Okay.
What's really interesting, though, is the actual mandate they have. They're not just, talk in theory. They're actively trying to build the foundation for these trust-based, people-centered digital ecosystems. The idea is to enable secure, seamless interactions across borders.
Right.
It's almost like infrastructure planning,
Yeah.
but for how people and digital commerce will move in the next decade.
Okay, let's unpack that and maybe start with the standard setter here, because when you talk digital identity globally, I mean, the conversation always seems to come back to the EU. They've really pushed ahead.
They absolutely have. The EU Digital Identity Wallet Initiative, you'll hear it called the EU DIW, it's quickly becoming the successor to physical ID cards. It's setting the standard, really, for how people assert their identity, manage their attributes, their credentials, all in the digital world.
And the scale is just huge, isn't it? That forces people to pay attention.
It does. We're talking deployment across hundreds of millions of citizens. When a market that big adopts a standard, yeah, the rest of the world, Canada included, really has to take notice. They're essentially defining the digital plumbing.
Okay, so that dominant role explains why this Ottawa workshop zoomed in on this new study, the one comparing the EU and Canada directly.
Precisely. The study focused entirely on EU-Canada digital identity and trust services interoperability. Think of it like a forensic analysis. It compared the two frameworks, pinpointed where they align, mapped out the divergences. And then, crucially, it offered concrete recommendations on bridging those gaps.
And officials there recognized the weight of this. I saw a quote from Ambassador Genevieve Tuts. She said the study gives valuable insights and recommendations that could pave the way toward interoperability and mutual recognition of digital credentials.
Yeah, and that phrase mutual recognition is key.
It's about codifying trust, right, into digital language.
That's the core strategic goal. That's the why for you, the listener. The big vision is secure, seamless, cross-border interaction. Imagine like a Canadian professional getting instant recognition for their certification in, say, Italy.
Or a European business verifying a Canadian supplier's credentials without waiting weeks for paperwork.
Exactly. All trust-based and built around the individual user having control.
Okay, so high ambitions. A clear leader setting the pace with the EU DIW. But if the core ideas, trust, security, user control, are aligned, why is it actually doing it, making it work technically so hard? This must be where we hit the legal differences.
This is where it gets down to the nuts and bolts of governance, yeah? The study confirmed it. The foundational principles might align, but the actual systems built on those principles, they're shaped by very different legal histories, different cultural values even.
It's like both sides agree on democracy in principle, but one runs on Windows and the other runs on macOS, legally speaking. The underlying operating system is just different.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually. And the huge divergence is legal tradition. It dictates how much weight a digital document actually carries.
Right.
So you've got the EU Many legal systems there are rooted in the Napoleonic code tradition, what we often call civil law. That system relies heavily on comprehensive written-down statutes. Everything needs to be explicitly spelled out in the law.
Okay, very structured.
Then you look at Canada, the UK, other Commonwealth nations. They operate under common law. And common law is heavily influenced by judicial precedent. Past court decisions can carry as much, or sometimes even more, weight than the written statutes themselves.
So how does that clash play out with something like a digital wallet?
Well, in a civil law place like the EU, for a digital credential to be legally binding, you often need a specific law that says this digital thing is legally binding. It has to be prescribed.
Explicitly stated.
Right. But in a common law system like Canada's, the legal validity of, say, a digital version of a credential might emerge more organically. A court might accept it, precedents build up over time, even if the original law didn't specifically mention digital format. It's more about interpretation and usage.
So rigid prescription versus flexible interpretation, that sounds like a fundamental difference.
It is. It's deep.
Wow.
And it affects everything. Privacy expectations, who's liable if something goes wrong with the wallet, you name it. You can't just build a technical bridge. You have to somehow bridge these two quite different legal philosophies.
Okay. So if that's the reality, these two distinct legal operating systems, how on earth do you create a common rule book? You can't just ask France or Canada to ditch centuries of legal tradition.
No, you definitely can't. And that leads us straight to the core recommendation, the really innovative part that came out of the Ottawa workshop. It's about using the UNCITRAL model as the framework to get the regulations aligned.
UNCITRAL. Okay, United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. That sounds potentially quite bureaucratic. Help us understand, how does a UN body help translate between, say, civil law France and common law Canada for digital IDs?
Think of UNCITRAL less as a bureaucracy and more as a set of globally recognized templates for smoothing out cross-border trade and legal issues. The study proposes using its model law on electronic transferable records as a kind of middleware methodology.
Middleware methodology. Okay, I like that.
It acts as a standardized neutral framework. It's designed for legal mapping across borders.
So like a legal handshake protocol. It sits between the Canadian common law structure and the EU's civil law structure. And it defines the agreed upon conditions. Like, if a digital credential meets these standards, both sides agree to treat it as valid when it crosses the border.
That's precisely the idea. It facilitates the governance alignment. It lets both sides agree on the rules of engagement. Things like what level of security assurance is needed, who bears liability, without forcing either side to rewrite their internal foundational laws. It respects the differences, but builds a functional bridge over them.
And the study was really clear on the order here, wasn't it? You need the regulatory agreement first.
Absolutely. You can't just code your way around a fundamental legal difference. The UNCITRAL model provides that critical foundation. Regulatory collaboration has to come before the technical alignment. You agree on the legal rules, then you get the tech guys to make the systems talk to each other.
Okay, and what makes this UNCITRAL approach strategically powerful?
It's the reusability. That's the really clever part. Once you do the hard work, this detailed, complex mapping between two major players with fundamentally different legal rules, like the EU, civil law, and Canada, common law, that blueprint, that mapping exercise, it becomes a kind of global public good.
Ah, okay. Now this is where it gets really interesting on a global scale. So you're saying if, I don't know, Japan or maybe Brazil, countries with their own distinct legal traditions, wanted to align their digital ID systems with the EU, they wouldn't have to start that huge legal comparison project from square one.
Correct. They could potentially leverage the foundational mapping work already done between Canada and the EU. It could dramatically speed up and simplify their own alignment efforts.
Wow.
So this EU-Canada digital partnership, it's not purely bilateral in its impact. It's effectively creating a template for how other diverse global systems might achieve digital trust in the future. It could define the architecture for, well, the Internet's next passport system, in a way.
Okay. So we've got conceptual alignment, we've got this regulatory vehicle, UNCITRAL, to handle the deep legal differences. But every plan, no matter how neat on paper, faces real-world hurdles. And the study flagged one final non-technical obstacle. Let's talk about that, the ultimate deciding factor.
Yeah, despite everyone recognizing the huge economic value, the strategic importance of getting this cross-border interoperability working, and we're talking potentially billions in value, the study was very clear. The main constraint isn't regulatory anymore. or even technical.
It's the classic hurdle for big international projects, isn't it?
It is political will. The success of this whole thing, even with a great framework like UNCITRAL ready to go, it ultimately hinges entirely on committed leadership
Yeah.
and, crucially, sustained engagement over time.
Right. So the experts did the analysis, the lawyers found the common ground using UNCITRAL, the tech teams are probably ready to build it. But if the governments don't keep prioritizing it, keep funding it, keep collaborating year after year, the whole thing could just stall.
That's the vulnerability, yes. This kind of work needs consistent, high-level focus. And that focus can easily get derailed by, short-term political cycles, shifting domestic agendas, budget cuts. The enthusiasm that drove that workshop in Ottawa needs to translate into long-term commitment embedded in the bureaucracies in both Brussels and Ottawa.
So it sounds like the hardest problem to solve isn't the legal puzzle anymore, or even the coding. It's maintaining the political momentum, making sure this stays a priority when governments change or crises hit. That needs champions on both sides pushing it constantly.
And that's really a universal lesson, isn't it?
Oh,
For
yeah.
any major international digital infrastructure project, you can have the most elegant blueprint, the best technical solution, but actually realizing it takes consistent political investment and follow-through. It's often the difference between a fascinating study report and something that actually gets built and used.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. What's the main takeaway for you listening to this?
Well, I think the central insight is this. Digital identity systems, like between the EU and Canada, they're basically aligned in principle. What they're trying to achieve is similar, but they are deeply different in their legal underpinnings. That common law versus civil Napoleonic law divide is real. The good news is a path exists to bridge that gap. Using the UNCITRAL model as that specialized regulatory middleware looks promising. However, actually walking that path, implementing that solution, it all comes down to sustained political commitment. Leadership in both the EU and Canada needs to keep pushing it.
Right. The pathway is there, but you need the political engine to drive progress along it. And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to mull over. Given that this EU-Canada work is successful, creates this reusable global template, bridging two major historically distinct legal systems, what happens if this partnership loses its political momentum? If it fails to deliver, what would that failure signal about the dream of truly global, borderless, trustworthy digital identity systems? This project feels much bigger than just Brussels and Ottawa.